ESPN is dropping their positional rankings heading into 2024. We already saw that they ranked Carson Beck as the number one quarterback in college football over guys like Quinn Ewers, Dylan Gabriel, Shedeur Sanders, Jackson Dart, and now they did their top 10 running backs. And a Georgia running back made the list, Trevor Etienne. He ends up with the 8th spot. So he ends up as number 8, as the 8th best running back in college football according to ESPN. But he is the top running back in the SEC, a conference that usually we see it filled with just really, really talented running backs, right? And you think about a Quinshon Judkins from last year who made this list and a little bit higher than Trevor Etienne. And now he's in the Big Ten because he's forming a pretty dynamic duo with Quinshon Judkins or with Travion Henderson. My bad. I was talking about Quinshon Judkins. But Etienne, he is the 8th guy on this list. Georgia, the running backs. It kind of feels like over the last 8 years, Georgia's running back production kind of has decreased a little bit. You teeter off from having, Sony Michel and Nick Chubb and Todd Gurley all on the same team to those guys becoming their own dynamic duo, and then having Swift behind them. And Swift ends up being a really, really talented NFL running back at caliber, and then obviously proves it and goes and does it in the NFL as well. And then you kind of move on to the James Cooks and the Zamir White, who, look, they ended up winning a national championship, but I don't think that they were quite the duo. Not quite. They were really, really, really good. They weren't quite what people thought they might become. And then it moves on to Kendall Milton, Kenny McIntosh, and then Kendall Milton and Dejon Edwards. And it feels like production-wise it's teetered off a little bit throughout the years. And last year, Georgia had a little bit of a running back issue at the beginning of the season. Look, I don't think, having Dylan Bell as a running back obviously was pretty good, and he had a really good yards per carry, and he proved that he could be a dynamic playmaker back there. But that's not plan A, it's not plan B, and I don't think it was plan C either. So Georgia goes out, and they get a guy like Trevor Etienne in the transfer portal because they want to have one of those really good running backs again. It's a depth play. It's an experience play. And it was a smart move for Kirby Smart and that staff heading into this year, because a guy like Trevor Etienne, it would have really shored up the beginning of the year struggles for Georgia in the running game. It got better and better as the year went on when Milton and Edwards. Edwards was really, really good in the middle of the year. Milton started to really get better as the year went on. Would Etienne have been starting ahead of both of those guys? I'm not exactly sure. And to be honest with you, I don't think that Trevor Etienne is this all-worldly running back. I think he's a very good running back. I think he is probably, I really don't see a world where he's not the starting running back for Georgia heading into this season. And they needed him with Milton and Edwards going away. Ryan Curley from Dog Post here, talking about Trevor Etienne and Georgia's running back room. We've talked about it a little bit this spring, and I've definitely talked about it on the website. I did kind of an extensive preview on Georgia's running back positions, talking about Trevor Etienne and Branson Robinson, how I think that they're the likely starters, how Roderick Robinson, I think, has a chance to have a breakout year, and maybe he ends up being the RB2 if Branson Robinson isn't able to get healthy. I talk about all of that stuff in those position previews. Now spring football is underway because I'm recording this Monday evening. This is going out Tuesday morning, and that means that Kirby Smart, a couple hours after this video is being published on YouTube, has introduced spring football with a press conference, and that means we're really underway. And you're not going to want to be missing out on the newsletter that I'm linking in the description down below, because the newsletter is the best way to keep up with all the stuff that I've been talking about over the last minute. You need to make sure you're signing up for that, and thanks again if you already are signed up. It's the easiest way to be tapped into everything Georgia football. The Dog Post newsletter. Appreciate you signing up for that. Trevor Etienne. Let's go ahead and look at what ESPN said about him. I'll read a little bit of it. Right, because his production on here, if you kind of scroll through and you look at the other guys on the top 10, he is on the lower end of the production with guys like Donovan Edwards, who was a backup running back, a rotational running back. Most of these guys were lead horses on their team, and now it looks like Trevor Etienne will be the lead horse for Georgia, but I just would be surprised if it's not by committee. But obviously I do think that Little Etienne will end up being the lead bell cow for Georgia. Bell cow might be a little bit of a stretch. Here's what he said. In one of the biggest offseason transfer portal moves, Etienne moved on from Florida to rival Georgia, immediately giving the Bulldogs a game changer at running back as they look to make another run at a national championship. Etienne was highly productive at Florida, but he was never the featured back as he split time with Montrell Johnson Jr. And that's my point with the stats, because you see here 750 yards, 700-ish yards each of his years is because he was complete rotation. And that was the case with Daijun Edwards and Kendall Milton this past year, both 800 plus. I think Milton, if he was healthy, would have ended up with over 1,000. Moving on, in 2 seasons with the Gators, he had about 1,500 yards and 14 touchdowns. He was used more extensively as a pass catcher in 2023 with 21 catches for 172 yards and 1 touchdown. Here's what I want to say about that with Trevor Etienne. I think that ability is big for Georgia. It was obvious, I think, how important in the last few years having a really capable wide receiver out of the backfield, and 2 of the best guys they've ever had for that have been Kenny McIntosh and James Cook, and I think it's a big part of their offensive success. And Daijun Edwards obviously Dylan Bell had a little bit of that role too when he was coming out of the backfield, but Daijun Edwards, he was the one that had to step up on that role. Not quite as dynamic of an athlete as a pass catcher as the previous 2 guys I mentioned with McIntosh and Cook there. The hope there for Georgia is that Trevor Etienne is able to bring that back into the offense and not only be a dynamic runner, but be a dynamic playmaker out of the backfield. I do think that Georgia is more successful when it has a successful receiving running back. I did a video about that recently where I broke down a lot of the numbers, and for the most part it shows the years that Georgia was a true contender or won the national championship, they had a guy like Kenny McIntosh or James Cook, or the total production of their wide receivers was getting closer to their running backs was getting closer to 500 yards and a few touchdowns out of the backfield. I think that having a guy like that is really important, and that's what they want out of Trevor Etienne. At Georgia, he has the opportunity to be the featured back in a proven system that values running the ball. The Bulldogs lost their 2 top guys, Kendall Milton and Daijun Edwards. Though Georgia shares the ball among its running backs, Etienne explained in a recent interview, I could be running back 2 on a losing team, or I'd go somewhere, possibly be the number 1 back on a natty team. That is what Trevor Etienne was saying the other day about Florida. Look, I agree with what ESPN, and it looks like it was a collective vote among their writers. I agree. They did a really good job of breaking this down. Why is he not ranked higher, right? Because I think people are really excited about Trevor Etienne. He's one of the top transfer running backs. Well, Ollie Gordon ran for 1,700 yards and 21 touchdowns for Oklahoma State last year. He's a Heisman contender. He's number 1. They've got Travion Henderson, number 2. Dealt with some injuries, but a really, really good running back, who's now paired with Quinshon Judkins as they have as 3. Didn't have quite as good of a sophomore year as he did of a freshman season, but he's behind guys like that, and he's behind guys in the Big 12 that are really, really productive. And do I think Trevor Etienne's going to have a season like those guys? Probably not. But a 1,000-yard season, maybe a couple hundred yards receiving, and 10-plus touchdowns is, I think, what you should be expecting from Trevor Etienne, and that would make him one of the better running backs in college football and prove this list true. And will they prove the list true with Carson Beck at number 1 as well? It'll be interesting to see. I don't think a Georgia receiver is going to make their top receivers list. It'll be interesting to see if a guy like Oscar Delper, the transfer from Stanford, make the top 10 tight ends list. But right now, ESPN doing its rankings, its preview rankings, Georgia's got a quarterback in the top 10, a halfback in the top 10, and the more guys you get in that, you see across the board how talented that Georgia is. And it's no surprise why they're favored to win this thing next season. Thanks for watching.